Welcome everyone to OBIC's Insight Series. I'm your host, Michelle Beyo, CEO and founder of Finavator, as well as an OBIC board member. I'm excited for today's open banking episode, highlighting the benefits open banking can have for consumers both in Canada and the UK. We'll be highlighting how open banking can provide consumers the greater access to new and innovative products and services to help them meet their financial needs and goals. As of March 2021, more than 3 million UK consumers and businesses are now using open banking to enable products to manage their financial services, access credit, and make payments, with over 6 billion API calls being had. The UK has doubled down on their open banking initiative, and 73% of UK financial institutions, FIs, have indicated a positive attitude towards open banking movement in 2020, compared to the 48% in 2019. Most now see the opportunity to leverage technology and fintech partnerships to build a new comprehensive view of their customers' data across various accounts, and through this delivery, more personalized financial products that can drive uptake and help customers grow. I'm really excited to introduce our distinguished moderator and panelist. Senator Deacon is an independent senator representing Nova Scotia. Senator Deacon has a very unique background as an entrepreneur and is focused on enabling collaboration between research and business, with a strong advocacy for innovation and consumer data. Thank you for being with us today, Senator Deacon. Also excited to introduce our panelists. Representing Canada, we have Judith Robertson, who's the Commissioner for the Financial Consumer Advocacy of Canada, the FCAC, and the former Commissioner of Ontario's Security Commissions. And representing the UK, we have Faith Reynolds, an independent consumer representative for open banking implementation entity, the OBIE. I'd like to start by having both Judith and Faith share a brief intro of their current role and some insights on the FCAC and the OBIE. Judith, can you get us started?
Yeah, sure. Thank you very much, Miss Michelle. Very pleased to be here. Thank you for the invitation, and always a pleasure to see Colin and Faith. Looking forward to the conversation. Just for those who aren't familiar with FCAC, let me just situate us for you. So we are a market conduct regulator for federally regulated institutions. So that's primarily banks. Our mandate is consumer protection. And so we do that in two ways. So one is market conduct regulation. So that's regulating how banks interact with their consumers. And the second is we do research and education in order to enhance consumer knowledge and financial literacy. We're one of the partners of the federal financial system for oversight. So that includes the Department of Finance, Bank of Canada, CDIC, the deposit insurer, and OBIC, who is the prudential regulator to our market conduct. And the whole concept behind market conduct, of course, is to recognize and attempt to address the fundamental knowledge differential and power differential between consumers and large, sophisticated institutions and complex products. And so our interest in the open banking file, of course, is to bring that lens to the considerations of what should be embedded in the framework from the outset. So we think that the market conduct standards should be contemplated and considered and embedded in the open banking framework at the outset. So that's one thing. And we think that the standard should be at least no less than what they experience today with their banks. Now, I'm not suggesting in any way that we take the Bank Act, which I happen to have here as a great little visual aid. You can see how gigantic it is, and apply that to fintechs. But you know, the fundamental concepts are quite simple in market conduct. It's about disclosure. Consumers need to know what they're buying. It's about consent. Consumers need to really agree or disagree and have that option. And then it's about what happens And how are they treated when things go wrong? When they make a complaint, it needs to be investigated and addressed. And if the bank is at fault, redress needs to be easily accessible for the consumer. And our third point is that it should be a consistent framework for no matter what the entity is. Okay, so consumers shouldn't need to know that if it's a fintech, it's one standard, and if it's a bank, it's another standard. The great opportunity of this open banking is we're going to get a lot of different players, and the onus can't be on the consumer to sort of sort out where they're protected and where they're not protected. We need to have a consistent standard, not identical, but consistent, and it also will benefit the industry by ensuring there's a level playing field. We don't want to put too much weight on one sector over another sector. And then the final thing, which gets to the sort of the opportunity set that we're very excited about, is there are persistent issues in our financial system that, like inclusion, right? Like predatory lending, we could go on, that we would love to see how we can utilize these platforms to move that whole thing forward. So we're very excited about the opportunity of working with industry to do things like experimentation and testing to see what supervisory interventions or what educational interventions are actually most effective, so we can move the whole thing forward to another level. So I'll stop there, but looking forward to the conversation.
Thank you so much, Judith. I'm so excited to have you here representing the FCAC, and just all of the mission that the FCAC is on is really for Canadians to have opportunity to understand innovation and have access with protection. And I really appreciate you explaining all of those aspects, and looking forward to hearing from Faith as well, to hear what you're doing in the UK with the OBIE.
Thanks very much, Michelle. It's great to be here, and thank you very much. It's a real privilege to be able to speak to a Canadian audience. So thanks for having me today. So I'm the independent consumer representative at Open Banking, and I guess it's useful to provide a little bit of context to Open Banking. So in 2016, the Competition and Markets Authority published its final report investigating the personal current account and business current account market in the UK, and it found that larger banks do not have, they didn't have enough, they didn't have to compete enough for customers, and smaller and newer banks were finding it difficult to grow and access the market. So to Judith's point, very quickly this is getting into the area. Open banking has been brought in to try and improve the quality and choice of services for consumers, bringing down costs, improving quality, and then at the same time opening up the market and levelling that playing field. And so they proposed a number of remedies. Open banking is one of those remedies. And in order to deliver open banking, which was a kind of process of standardizing APIs to enable consumers to share their data with other parties, they thought it was appropriate to set up the Open Banking Implementation Entity. And the implementation entity has a steering group, and that is the main kind of governance. And that group advises the trustee, and the group is made up of the 9 largest banks who are subject to the order, as well as 5 stakeholder representatives from the fintech sector, from the payment sector, etc. And then an independent consumer representative, which is me, and an SME representative, which is my colleague Mark Chidley. And the Open Banking Implementation Entity is really there to design the APIs and the standards that banks and building societies use to securely provide access to data. And it supports the regulated third-party providers to access those standards, and provides a sort of suite, if you like. And the Open Banking Standard is made up of security profiles, the API standards, the operational guidelines, and also customer experience guidelines. And I think it might be useful just to kind of touch on some of the things that we're doing from a consumer point of view at open banking. So I think, first of all, as part of the standard, we have identified these customer experience guidelines, and they really set out primarily the first point. It was for the banks, really, who are subject to the order, to lay out clearly what it was that they needed to deliver and what the interface should be for consumers. So when they first started implementing the API standards, some of the journeys were very long. And from a consumer point of view, there was too much friction. For instance, it was taking too long for consumers to be able to get through the journey. And so the customer experience guidelines really kind of made it clear what is it that you needed to do, how did you need to do it, and that included very clear guidelines on what information so explaining what information you're sharing to the consumer, making it clear how long you're taking the data for what purpose, and how consumers can revoke that. So lots of very clear information about what TPPs should do and what banks should do. And as part of the development of the customer experience guidelines, we've recently been looking at, should we be thinking about how the third-party providers onboard their customers, as well as how they seek consent. How do they explain the terms and conditions? How do they make sure that they've conveyed what the value exchange is? So part of the work that we've been doing and consulting on, I have to say it's still being consulted on, is looking at, should there be a code of conduct, or should we be looking at getting the customer experience guidelines for TPPs or third-party providers, the fintechs? Should we be getting those guidelines reinforced, so recognised by our Financial Conduct Authority, the regulator, to see if we can just expand the boundaries and really kind of standardise some of the behaviours in the market. One of the other areas that we've been involved in at open banking is looking at how do we very clearly lay out what we think the consumer outcomes from open banking should be. So it's probably worthwhile stating that, as you can imagine, anything to do with APIs and screen scraping immediately becomes quite a techie conversation. And we have purposefully set out to really bring some consumer lens to that techie conversation, to say, actually, what is it that we are trying to achieve for consumers downstream? What is the purpose of what we're trying to achieve here? And so we have set out what we believe we're achieving for consumers and the value that we're creating through a consumer outcomes evaluation framework. And that framework identifies what we're trying to achieve, but it also allows us to start measuring the market, looking at the propositions that help deliver those outcomes, and then thinking about, oh, okay, well, how many of those propositions are in market, what's coming through, and then what is the experience that consumers have when they use those propositions? Is it a good experience? And then perhaps one of the other things, it's just not just looking at how well it's all going and what are the real opportunities and what are the outcomes and how is the market delivering against those, but also thinking about, oh, there are some risks here. And I think it's been really encouraging that the industry has come together and convened around what we call the End User Risk Committee, which actually identifies risks that can occur, not just with the technology, not just with the products, but the broader ecosystem risks that, for instance, digital exclusion, and thinks about, okay, what is it that we can do in this environment to mitigate the risks or escalate those to other stakeholders who can help. And so that's some of the work that I've been involved in initiating and advising on at Open Banking.
Thank you, Faith. It's such a pleasure to have you here and to have this discussion. I'm very happy and excited to pass it over to Senator Deacon to go into some questions.
Thanks very much, Michelle, and Faith and Judith. It's really, and I think we're working on a first name basis in this casual conversation. I think it's just a great opportunity for me to learn, because we've got a history in Canada of tremendous stability in our financial system, but we also are living in a be disrupted world that is bringing new opportunities to the fore, and I think helping us to deal with systemic risks that are in our system, and also diversity risks in our system. There's a lot of underbanked and unbanked Canadians, and we saw a story just last night in the national news about two Black business owners who were really feeling like the variability in our rules, we're not making them, not giving them the same access to opportunities and banking services that others might have. And we've got to really look at our system critically and saying, are we serving all Canadians really well? And I think that what's wonderful about where our two guests started is it's embedded firmly, your focus is embedded firmly in the consumer experience. And I think that's where we've got to make sure that we are delivering that value and earning that trust on an ongoing basis. And I hear those words very clearly from each of Judith and Faith. So one of the things that I've noticed is whenever I start talking about open banking outside of those who are in the know, I get this. No one has a clue what open banking is in Canada, but they do have opinions. I mean, we've got what, 5 million Canadians that have moved towards the use of third-party services or financial technology services. So we've moved. We're seeing the market move, and we're seeing services being offered that help people address issues that are central to their financial literacy and their own financial experience. So I just wanted to ask the first question, really just to focus on what are your perceptions, Faith, and I'll ask you to start on what consumers want and need from this shift in towards open banking.
So I think if you look at financial services generally, and they're really very complicated. Perhaps in Canada you've managed to solve the problem of complexity,
I think Judith's prop did a good job of illustrating that.
Yeah. And it's just so complicated, isn't it? And people's lives can be quite complicated too. And mostly we just want things to be simple and easy. So by and large, we're looking for services that make our lives easier and not more complicated. And I think that's where open banking can really help shift the dynamic, is that we want services that will actually help us with our day-to-day lives and wrap themselves around what we need and want. So things are much more responsive, much simpler to understand, much more accessible. And I think as part, just to kind of, tell the story a little bit from the UK, as part of the design of open banking, we also established some design principles, and I actually advise on some other open initiatives, so the open savings, investment and pensions product. And this morning we were talking about how we can develop those principles further. But what was really encouraging this morning, just to your point, Colin, was that we were looking at one of the principles being diversity by design, actually making sure that the products and the services that are coming downstream actually are really inclusive and really responsive to the different diverse needs that we have in our society, and that they aren't discriminating against people from a particular race or people of a particular gender or people with disabilities, that actually we make
certain communities or whatever. Yes, yeah, absolutely.
We want to make sure that whichever community you come from, you feel and perceive that you're able to engage with these types of products and services. And so that does create quite an onus on product developers to think differently from perhaps traditionally how they've done. And the great joy with open banking is that you can bring in the data to really understand somebody's situation. You can see what they value, you can see where they spend, how they're living their lives. You get very intimate information through transaction data about people. So actually using that data, but using it in a way which is socially good and creates a socially preferable outcomes is really important. So thinking about creating those design principles which are accessible and inclusive, that we're creating products that are more affordable, is all very important. And I think encouraging industry to kind of convene around design principles and then looking at how do we actually see those design principles embedded is quite important. But I mean, we're not there yet, because there's one thing to write a series of principles out. The other thing is thinking about how do we operationalize ethics, and that's another area that we can perhaps talk about. But think about how do we take the good intent and then see it running through and delivered in practice. But by and large,
I would expect continuing to evolve how you do that as you learn.
That's right, absolutely. Yeah.
That's great, Faith. Thank you. And so, Judith, from your standpoint, I mean, what do you think? Does Faith's perspective on this reflect your experience in terms of what consumers want and need from the yet to be understood concept of open banking?
Yes, they do, very much. You know, I think it's really important for us all to always bear in mind that while we think about this industry and these issues day in, day night, and we're paid to do that, and, you know, obviously we enjoy that, or we wouldn't be self-selected here, most people do not. Most people view dealing with their financial situation like going to the dentist. It's kind of a necessary evil, and they just want it to be quick and painless. And you know, I wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't point out, and some of the complexity is designed by those providers in order to, you know, take advantage of some of the, if you like, decision weaknesses of consumers. So there's a little bit of a give and take there as well. But you're right, you know, so I think we have to speak truthfully about this. But the, you know, so I'll just speak to some of the advantages that I think are really critical at the foundational level, which is, I call it friction, right? There is a tremendous amount of friction in our banking industry, and it is in part because these are giant organizations that have legacy systems. But it's also in part designed because friction increases switching costs. And if you have high costs for switching, then perhaps you'll reconsider switching, right? And anyone who has tried to change accounts or you know, move money from, somehow it's really easy to move money into the account. Moving money out of the account takes days and weeks, right? And so on and so on. So one of the great opportunities to get this in place is basically to take all of those high friction costs down across the board, which then promotes the real choice consumers have, right? Consumers can say, I'm unhappy with this provider, I'm going to move to this provider or this product. And they can have a different suite of products that are more carefully tailored. The important thing is to offer the choice and the ability to choose without it, you know, requiring expending a lot of time and energy, without increasing the complication and the burden of knowledge. So we got to find that sweet spot.
But you just, your description there just captured the reason why Canada's Competition Commissioner, Matt Boswell, has been so encouraging of the government to move on this file for a long time. Because that ability to move your money more easily, to move your accounts more easily, to choose, to have more freedom to choose who you do business with, increases competition, spurs innovation, and really makes sure that greater value is delivered to consumers. So key protections that I think your agency is responsible for, and it's a systemic change that I think also will help those within these larger organizations, the incumbent organizations, those who want to see things, innovations come along, versus the, you know, when you've got your prop, I'm going back to your prop, when you've got a deck like that you're dealing with, you can see anytime somebody comes into an executive's office with a bright idea that requires a change to a bunch of those rules, they're going to get a bunch of friction. So as we simplify this, they're going to, because it's going to be hard to make changes. So herein lies one of the challenges that we have, is that if we want our system to become more consumer centric, if we want to achieve these ends, it will require a change in how we regulate over time, not just the ways we regulate, but the really much of the strategy behind it. So Faith, if you could just speak a little bit about the experience. In our Senate Banking Committee over 2 years ago, we had the benefit of Imran coming in and speaking to us. And I can tell you, it had a profound effect on every single member of our committee in the Senate. we were just so impressed with where the focus was and the opportunities that we're unlocking and the systematic approach to it. But just speak about how you see regulation evolving, because you really struck me with one point about the end user group that you've created, to really look at the experience, not from the silo, but from the experience of the consumer and the regulatory changes that are needed to get that experience to be improved on an ongoing basis. So speak about that a little bit, if you could.
No, sure. It is a fascinating area, isn't it? I mean, I think just in terms of thinking, I was just struck by the sort of, what's the opportunity of open banking? And there is very much the opportunity here, not just for the sort of financial value, the savings and the improved returns, but also the opportunity to really help people increase visibility and control over their finances, for improved decision making, and also helping people meet their later life goals as well. So there's quite a lot of opportunity and value, but it does require some rethinking, as you say, around regulation and what do we need to think about differently. And I think at a very high level, I think there is, as we open up data, it does have a bearing on other sectors. So data can be used for all sorts of interesting things, and even within open banking, you're looking at how does transaction data get used to help somebody reduce their energy bills, and what kind of information do you need from the energy sector to do that? And if it's actually an energy provider, not a financial services provider that's providing that service with your financial data, what does that mean for regulation? So there is a really interesting kind of question about, as we move into data economies, do we need regulators to think more holistically in a more joined up way, so that actually we've got more coherence, but particularly for consumers, that they know that when they share their data in one sector, or if they share it in another, they're protected. They don't have to worry. They see familiarity breeds trust, and also they know that actually across the board, it doesn't matter whether it's a fintech or whether it's a bank, whether it's an energy company, whether it's a retailer, I know that if they've got access to my data, I'm safe. But that does require quite different ways of thinking about regulation.
I would think, because what you've got to be able to do is have that standard in place that is enforced consistently, so that consumers know why the data is being used, who's using it, and for how long, and what their benefit is going to be from it.
Yeah, I mean, to talk more about sort of the UK model, I think that's exactly what we're heading for. So I've just been writing actually a report which will be published in a few weeks for our government, which is looking at cross-sector accreditation. How do we make it possible to create this harmonised process of being able to share data across sectors? And it's really important that there are standards that work. So first of all, you want to be able to make sure that the gateway in to being able to access somebody's data is consistent across the board, and that's a really important part of that. And for in the UK, one of the big steps that was taken by the Financial Conduct Authority was actually to extend its principles of business, its conduct principles, to fintechs. So this wasn't required as part of European law, which is what kick-started the whole thing for us in here in the UK, but they extended their perimeter. So first of all, they had to extend so that they were able to provide the right protection for consumers. But then through open banking, we've created these standards, these API standards. And most recently, we've also, the FCA has also suggested that it will ban what we call the modified customer interface. It's basically saying no more screen scraping. We are going 100% with what they call a dedicated interface, APIs only. So while for the CMA9, the largest 9 banks in the UK, they had to follow the API route, smaller banks could choose which route they followed. Now we're moving to the point of saying, actually, because of the value you get, because you can have increased security through APIs, increased competition for fintechs because they can access the data more easily through these standards. And also from a consumer point of view, you can have better data minimization, because so that means that I'm not sharing data that I don't need to share, that TPPs only access the data that they need for the service that they're providing. That's possible through the design of API endpoints and endpoint permissions that we have, and also that the customer experience is much improved. So we have some companies who have who've transitioned from screen scraping to APIs, and they've just seen a real increase in actually customers being able to join their service much quicker, so the onboarding process. So yes, so that's all made a really big difference. But really, just coming back in from a consumer point of view, it's really important, because actually I know my data is safe and secure, but also there's some rules that you put around the standardization which lead to greater clarity and protection.
And I'm struck by those minimum standards as being an opportunity to get even better versus a ceiling. They become a floor, and it really helps us move in a different direction. So Judith, bringing it back to Canada, and I'm just thinking in terms of how so often I spent a life in small business. I didn't start a single business with the desire to manage the related administrative burden, I can assure you. And the opportunities for small business to allow the business owner to spend more time on their business versus on the necessary evils of keeping their business functioning through open banking are tremendous. But I also, something that we've spoken about before, which I think is really interesting, is the intermingling of personal funds and business funds as businesses get going and as an entrepreneur gets started can dramatically enhance their risks in terms of making a mistake. It makes their life even more complicated. It makes it harder for them to see where they're at. So I'm struck by that fact, and the challenge that we have in our strong regulatory regime in this country, sort of where it is today, and we've got to move from that while constantly making that things better for the consumer. Because I love Faith is it's very clear in the UK, they're like your agency, they're very, very focused on benefits to consumers. So what do you see as being the biggest opportunities for us to stay focused on to make sure that consumers win out of these regulatory changes? Because for me, that's what it's all about. It's about driving benefits to small business and to consumers, both of which fall under your umbrella in terms of making sure that they're protected and they increase their literacy. What are the biggest things that you would want us to stay focused on as we look at these changes that are going to be tough for us to do?
Sure. It's it's actually interesting that I see a convergence of a lot of things happening at the same time, and perhaps that's not a surprise. But the regulatory mindset, if you like, globally, what regulators are talking about globally is a shift, right? And it's a shift to outcomes. So as opposed to looking at a world that's reasonably static and saying, okay, this is what they're doing, we want them to stop doing that, so we're going to say, here's the form you have to fill, or right, here's the thing you have to do, and then that will fix it. And then we're going to check and make sure you did that. So that's sort of old school. New school is, well, we're not going to pretend that we understand everything you're doing, right? This is a fast moving, innovative, new products are coming, and we need to first admit what we don't know and can't hope to supervise. And plus, you don't want an army of regulators peeking into every single nuance. But what we can do is say, well, you tell us what you think this product is for and how you're going to sell it and who you're going to sell it to, and then we can test whether the outcomes actually deliver what you say they're going to deliver. So for the example that you put on inclusion, right, and treating different populations differently, and that is one of the persistent issues that we are focused on. And I'll tell you that the banking community is also focused on, yep. Right? It's not an easy problem to solve. And COVID has demonstrated the disparities very starkly. But if you start testing and you start seeing those disparities in a product set or in a marketing plan or right in a particular institution compared to their peers, then all of a sudden you have a different conversation, which is, I'm not going to tell you how to fix it, but I'm going to tell you must fix it. And then now you show me a new result, right? Like, so it's a shift to let's talk about the outcomes we're looking for, as opposed to here are the rules we're going to comply with very specifically.
And that to me is such a source of inspiration, because that unlocks innovation. And I can tell you from somebody who's spent his life in the world of new entrants into markets, I don't know a single investor that I've met who's a venture capital investor, others who are interested in harming the customers of the investee companies. They are very interested in making sure the customers of investee companies are well served, and they can create very, very innovative ways to do that. And that's what I find that gets me going, is that if we can unlock that innovation, I think we can move the needle on some of these pervasive issues. And that the different approach to regulation that you're describing, which establishes a floor and minimum standards that you must adhere to, and how you do it, we'll leave open to you, I think unlocks that. Faith, does that fit? We're getting close to time here, but does that fit within the context of what you've been really working on? It certainly sounds like it.
So I think, yeah, there's a lot of overlaps. I think definitely the outcomes focus very much, and that's why we've gone with an consumer outcomes evaluation process. I think with the focus on outcomes, I think it has to be pervasive through not just the regulator, but actually firms setting out how are we going to be outcomes focused, and then also how are we going to measure that, because it's very easy to set out and be outcomes focused, but it's not always very easy to measure it. And I think that's where we need to kind of move that discussion to how is it being measured. But I think the other thing is also differentiating between those activities which are competitive and those activities which need to be collaborative. And open banking is very much at the heart of that debate. Where do we need to be collaborative? Because we need to set out the standards and we need to work together on those. And as an industry, we need to be able to do that without, with some autonomy, so the regulator can set out, you need to standardize, but the industry will need to set out, oh, okay, we need to arrange ourselves to make that possible. But it's very important to make sure that there is a level of collaboration, which then facilitates the very diverse and exciting competition. So when you're thinking about the outcomes, there are going to be moments where you need a kind of a push from the regulator, because otherwise collaboration and convening doesn't always happen on its own, does it? But also where the industry can take the lead. And I think where I see things going in the UK is that we have just had the FCA feedback statement, which is very clear that actually to move the dial on opening up data, you do need an implementation entity. You do need somebody pushing the decisions through, because sometimes the interests of different participants don't align, or sometimes they don't align to consumers. So that's why you do need to have a level of kind of collaboration, but that is what creates the rules of the game, the playing field. Nobody turns up to a game of football and says, oh, I think I'll move the goalposts or the pitch. And everybody's like, right, no, let's play the game. And that's what we're really about here, trying to make sure we've got the right pitch so we can play really great games. Well, obviously not games, but you know what I mean.
I get the analogy. Judith, and I'll ask the same question of Faith as we end, but how do we know as we move through this that we are being successful from your standpoint as a regulator, protecting our consumers, making sure that our consumers are becoming more financially literate? And I think that you can become relatively more financially literate by having the system less complicated and more obvious and less friction. There's many ways for us to get to that end, but how will you be defining success? Because it's really important in my mind that someone in your position sees that we are getting incrementally and hopefully substantively better on an increasing basis. What will be really meaningful to you?
Yeah, I appreciate the question. I also appreciate Faith's analogy, because I think it shows the two sides of our mandate. The best thing that regulation can contribute is establishing the standard, right? That we as a society agree to. So it can be the rules of the game, or we've used a building a highway analogy for open banking. So in addition to the highway and the guardrails, you also have to have the agreement about which side of the road you're going to drive on, right? Because otherwise it gets a bit dicey. And so for me, success is when we have established those rules of the road, right? And we've agreed on what it is so that we all can take that journey and arrive safely. Right, and we know what they are, and we don't need to have a PhD to understand them. We don't even need to know, how the plumbing works. Right, I have said before that open banking is banking, and so success to me is when somebody doesn't think about open banking; they just think about banking, and they're doing it in a way that is suitable to them and suitable to their needs, and that we haven't overestimated an individual's ability to understand and make decisions, but rather we have delivered them a system and an infrastructure that is serving their needs.
It's working for them to improve their financial stability and their certainty about their financial future as best as possible.
Yeah.
I really appreciate the simplicity of that. That is a success factor. Faith, if I could ask a slightly different question, then what is your one piece of advice to Canada based on the journey that you've been through in the UK and are currently on? And it is a journey that I think we're about to embark on. And we will not get things perfect up front. You don't change major regulatory systems and get it perfect right off the bat, but we've proven in Canada through COVID that we can iterate, and so if we can do it with COVID, we can do it with the foundation of our economy as well. Be careful, constantly monitor. But what is your short 1 or 2, 3 pieces of advice? Canada, stay focused on these things.
So firstly, I would say set out what it is you're going to deliver very clearly for individual people, for small businesses, and also for society, because the availability of data does open up other opportunities to help us at a societal level too. So first, be very clear about what it is you're going to deliver in terms of outcomes. Then involve people with lived experience, involve real people in the design of what you're doing. If you can, involve civil society and consumer organisations too, so that actually you've got people right front and centre who can actually give you a bit of a tweak and help you cross those T's and dot those I's and head you in the more perfect direction. And then the other thing is to just keep looking, keep monitoring, keep tracking, proactively mitigate risks. We know enough about financial services, we know enough about data sharing to know that there are definitely risks. So let's proactively mitigate those so that actually we can create data sharing and plumbing so that when I don't think about data sharing, it's as safe as turning on the tap to drink a glass of water.
That's really great advice, Faith. Faith and Judith, I'm really grateful for this conversation. It's been an inspiration to me. I love the shift in how we're thinking about regulation. I think it's so important to unlock innovation in our economy. And Michelle, I'm handing it back to you a little late, and I do apologize that I've gone over time, but it's because of the quality of our guests. So thank you very much.
No, thank you. This has been such a wonderful discussion. And I know we're just about over time, but I have one last question because I think it's so important as we drive to help Canadians access financial services that are more affordable and with more competition. Marketing and education is so much at the center of it. And Faith, I do want to ask from a UK perspective, knowing that in 2018, the launch of open banking occurred because 1 million people were screen scraping and you were looking for a better way to protect your citizens. And now coming to a point where we're almost able to remove screen scraping because your APIs are so reliable and are driving the better security, better access, revocability, and all of these great benefits. How have you marketed that for consumers to pick up to 3 million as of March in the UK?
So I think that is a really interesting question. And by and large, I think what we found is that it has been difficult in the UK. We haven't had an above the line campaign, which is perhaps something I would advocate for, to let people know that they can share their data, to let people know that it's safe and secure to share their data, that there's benefit that you can get from the products and services, and actually that moving is worthwhile. So if there was one thing I'd say is actually make sure that you're thinking about how you communicate that to people in Canada. We haven't done that in the UK, so we've had to rely on individual firms selling propositions, which isn't necessarily bad. In fact, it's been quite productive for many organisations. But I think there is a challenge, particularly around how people just get generally aware that they actually have data, that they can control their data, and that they have that choice to share it. And that's the really important message to get across, that people can share their data, they can get value from new products and services, and they can achieve different life goals as a result of that.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for that. And Judith, just over to you as we go to embark on trying to give Canadians better access, hopefully with the enablement of open banking one day. How do you think we could address that? Because I do know that it's been said Canadians are quite happy being 97% currently banked, not needing open banking. But I think they just don't understand that these 4 to 5 million are utilizing screen scraping to access services that are helping them today, but they don't realize they're breaching their current banking agreements to get access. How can we educate them better, and how can we help move this file forward in a way that helps government understand the impact and importance of us getting there for our citizens?
So I think, I think the importance of this issue is well understood. And is a real focus. So it's not for lack of interest, let's put it that way. But these are difficult issues. We agree completely that screen scraping, and we have recommended in our submission to the committee that screen scraping be sunset. And we have even in our educational information issued an alert about it. So we have done our part in trying to inform consumers. But I think, again, I'll come back to, we do also need to be careful about how much emphasis we put on education. While it's important and will be a very important component in ensuring consumers do their part in having the information to make good choices, we also need to just ensure that the system is set up in a way that allows them to at least not make terrible choices, right? So the guardrails and provides them with access and information that they need at the time and in the way they need it in order to make those good choices.
Yeah, no, fair point. And I'm just really excited for the future of Canadians as we look to other countries and some of the ecosystem engagement and growth that they have seen. And I'm very hopeful for that to come to Canada and for more discussions like these. Thank you both, Faith and Judith and Senator Deacon, for your time and for all of your incredible insights as we look to try and drive open banking forward.
Thanks very much for including me, and Judith and Faith, thank you so much for your insights.
My pleasure. Thank you. Nice to see you all.
Yeah, thank you very much. It's been a real privilege.